Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's webinar. This week, we're going to be focusing on culturally and linguistically responsive practices and how we incorporate those into a multi-tier system of support, or MTSS. My name is Michelle Lambert-Yuhasz, and I am part of the tier team here at the University of Texas at Austin. I have two special guests today. They are the developers of the module that we will be showcasing today. We have Dr. Romero Grimaldo and Dr. Shannon Giroir. They're both from the University of Texas at Austin. And they will be joining us today. And they're going to be showcasing the module that they developed. So just as a recap, as you recall, we are one of the 9 technical assistant networks funded by the Texas Education Agency. We were previously referred to as intervention best practices. If you look at the top of the screen, we have changed the name of our network to Tiered Interventions Using Evidence-Based Research, or TIER for short. We aim here at TIER Network in order to support your local education agency and the schools that you support with your MTSS framework. TIER is designed to provide a comprehensive and coherent plan for intervention best practices across Texas. And we have done this by collaborating with experts across the great state of Texas as well as the United States. So here in Texas, we have tapped into experts at the Texas Regional Educational Service Centers, as well as a couple school districts and universities here in Texas. And then we also tapped into experts across other universities across the nation, as well as some national technical assistant centers. And what we ask these experts to do is develop a set of material, some comprehensive professional learning materials. And these may encompass presentations, handouts, resources, or even videos. And we have designed this into 10 modules, as you can see here on the screen. If you have been visiting us on the previous webinars, you probably recognize some of these modules that we've already visited. Now, as you're thinking of these modules, just this is your first time, just to recap, is if you were to take a module in its entirety, it would take anywhere from 3 to 20 hours to take an entire module. However, you have the flexibility of taking the module as a whole, or you can take the individual pathways that are part of the module as an individual learning opportunity. Look at it as choose your own adventure or your own learning opportunity. So for example, today, if you look here on the screen where it's highlighted in yellow, we're going to pull out this particular module and we're going to showcase it. So we're going to give you a sample of what this module entails. So if you look at this particular module, culturally responsive, it has 3 pathways. So you can take this whole module, culturally responsive, the whole module as a whole, essentials, incorporation of academic intervention, or considerations of behavior intervention as a whole. Or you can take each one of these pathways by itself as an individual learning opportunity. That is up to you. Now, like I said, we have both developers here today. And what they're going to do is they're going to showcase the entire module. So you're going to walk away today with a sample of what each one of these pathways may entail. And so when you walk away today, you're going to have a really good idea of what this particular module includes. So I would like to formally introduce my special guest. We have Dr. Leticia Grimaldo, and she is a co-principal investigator. And then we have Dr. Shannon Giroir, which is a co-investigator, both with the English Learner Institute for Teaching and Excellence, or Project Elite for short. This particular project is funded by the Office of Special Education Programs in the U.S. Department of Education at the Meadows Center for Preventing Educational Risk with the University of Texas at Austin. They are also project leads as well as researchers at the University of Texas as part of the Meadows Center for Preventing Educational Risk. If you'd like to learn more about these particular developers, please check out their full bio, which will also be found on the website. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Letty and Shannon, and they're going to share the great resources and content that can be found in this particular module. Thank you, Letty and Shannon. It's all yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Now we will take you through the module overview of culturally and linguistically responsive practices. In the first pathway of this module, we will explore the essentials for culturally and linguistically responsive practices. We will talk about what it is, what it looks like in practice at the classroom level, school level, and district level, and connections between culturally and linguistically responsive practices with restorative practices. In the second pathway, incorporation and academic intervention, we will explore how to incorporate culturally and linguistically responsive practices within multi-tiered systems of support. We will begin by exploring the characteristics of responsive and targeted interventions, consider practices in both assessment and instruction that optimizes MTSS for culturally and linguistically diverse students, and conclude by examining consideration of reading, writing, and content area instruction within MTSS. In the third pathway, considerations for behavior intervention, we will examine the characteristics of behavior intervention incorporating culturally and linguistically responsive practices. We will also explore implicit bias and how this affects the way we see behavior in our schools. Now let's take a look at some of the items that are covered in the essentials pathway of the culturally and linguistically responsive practices module. So what does it mean to be culturally responsive? According to the National Center for Cultural Responsive Educational Systems, here's a quote. It really is about the ability to learn from and relate respectfully with people of your own culture, as well as those from other cultures. It involves exploring and honoring your own culture while at the same time learning about and honoring other people's cultures. When we think about culture, we often think of racial and/or ethnic groups of people and the foods, music, and holidays they may share. While this is one part of it, culture is much larger than the visible traditions that we see. It's a combination of our thoughts, feelings, attitudes, values, and beliefs. It is how we do life and is informed by the lens in which we view the world. What is also important to note is that culture is dynamic and fluid. It is not static, and our cultural norms shift and move as we grow and have different experiences in life. Throughout this module, educators will have opportunities to explore their own cultural identity and reflect on how their cultural identity informs how they teach in the classroom. So what does culturally and linguistically responsive practices look like at the classroom level? In classrooms that incorporate culturally and linguistically responsive practices, educators make conscious efforts to get to know their students well and take the time to establish strong relationships with them and their families. They demonstrate high expectations for all students, providing students with needed supports to reach their potential. Educators use linguistic scaffolds to ensure all students have access to the curriculum and validate students' language practices and funds of knowledge that come from their homes and communities. Finally, educators who are culturally and linguistically responsive ensure that students' culture and lived experiences are well represented in the curriculum used for instruction. This pathway will explore each one of these areas in depth and provides activities, guiding questions, and examples for each one. Building positive relationships with students and families is the foundation of CLRP. In this way, restorative practices is an extension of that tenet. To effectively build a culture in which all students feel a sense of belonging to the school community, educators need to build trust and reciprocity with families. Through relationships, educators understand the values upheld by the communities they serve, and the design and implementation of restorative practices take those values into account, ensuring that community stakeholders are included in design and implementation, students are empowered as active participants in the resolution process, and their strengths are capitalized on, so they can meet exceedingly high expectations. And their perspective and experiences are validated and valued as well. In this pathway, we also explore what culturally and linguistically responsive practices looks like at the district and school levels. We go through the importance of building relationships with families and communities, recognizing diversity as an asset for learning, ensuring equitable access to culturally relevant academic resources, recognizing and addressing bias that our systems and personnel may have, and the importance of providing ongoing professional learning around cultural and linguistic competence. We provide concrete action steps that districts and schools can take in order to begin their journey on becoming culturally and linguistically competent in each one of these areas. Here's an example of the action steps that can be taken by a school and district leader to begin building relationships with families and communities. District and school leaders can make conscious efforts to be proactive in the recruitment and retention of diverse teacher workforces that represent the student population they are serving. Schools and districts can strengthen relationships with local universities and community associations to support this area. A non-negotiable at school meetings and events should be to provide interpretation services so all families have access to important information. This is really the only way that two-way communication and providing families the opportunity to share their own thoughts, feelings, and feedback can occur. One of the key principles of creating culturally and linguistically responsive classrooms is for teachers to use funds of knowledge to inform classroom instruction. It is important for leaders to provide resources to school staff that share the events that are impacting the community that they serve. If culturally and linguistically responsive schools is the goal for leadership, then a policy statement sharing that commitment publicly should exist. And finally, involve families and community in the review of school policies. This can include, but is not limited to, dress code, discipline code, and conduct code. Incorporate research-based best practices such as positive behavior interventions and restorative justice. Useful resources will also be provided for schools and districts to use for support. Here are some useful checklists that can be incorporated to self-assess how the district or school is doing in the areas of being culturally and linguistically responsive to the communities which they serve. This first checklist is the Assessing Partnerships checklist. It's a good way to assess how you are doing in incorporating families and communities in all aspects of the district and school community. It's part of the CARE Guide, Strategies for Closing the Achievement Gaps by the National Education Association. This next list is a culturally and linguistically responsive response to intervention within multi-tiered systems of support, fidelity of implementation rubric. This is a comprehensive rubric which allows leadership teams at the school and district level to ensure that their RTI models are culturally and linguistically responsive to meet the needs of all students. And now Shannon will take you through the next two pathways of this module.
Thanks, Leti. So now we'll talk about incorporating CLRP into academic interventions. In the second pathway of Module 6, you'll take what you've learned from the essentials, what Leti has just introduced you to, and consider ways that MTSS can and should be enhanced for students of diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. This slide shows the core practices associated with multi-tiered instructional models. We have Tier 1, or core instruction. Educators want to ensure that all students receive strong core instruction, that it's differentiated, it's high quality, and it's research-based. Educators also want to ensure that database decision-making is occurring systematically, that students are screened for academic difficulties, and that students' progress is regularly assessed. And for students that are identified as needing additional academic support, that interventions are supplemental, and meaning that they don't replace core instruction. They're targeted for specific areas of need and they vary in levels of intensity. Now in this pathway 6.2, what you'll do is look at those core practices of multi-tiered instructional models and consider ways they need to be enhanced for culturally and linguistically diverse students. So instruction across tiers, we look at ways that you can apply the principles of culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy and practice. In this pathway, you'll also learn about language considerations and the role of language within MTSS, particularly for students who are English learners. There are different types of data that educators want to be looking at when making instructional decisions for English learners within MTSS. Data that tells educators about students' language proficiency, about their educational histories. In other words, we want to have a good understanding of the type and quality of the instruction English learners have received previously, and the extent to which they have developed literacy in their first language, English or both. Most importantly, educators have to have a good understanding of the process that students go through as they acquire their first and second languages, as this understanding is so important when trying to determine why a student might be struggling academically and trying to determine what intervention is the most appropriate for that student. So taking language into consideration is emphasized in Pathway 6.2. You'll also consider how instruction and assessment practices are linguistically aligned. Educators want to ensure that the assessments given to students are appropriate for the instructional model on your campus, whether that be a bilingual education model or an English as a second language model. You'll also examine those different considerations as part of Pathway 6.2. Route 6.3.2 focuses on assessment and database decision-making. In this part of Module 6, participants will have a chance to consider specific ways they can optimize assessment practices for culturally and linguistically diverse students. Participants will learn about what effective assessment practices are. They will also have an opportunity to engage in reflective learning activities. As we talked about earlier, it's important for educators to get to know their students and have systematic methods for developing knowledge about the students they serve, specifically for English learners and students who have immigrated to the United States. Educators need to get a good understanding of the types of literacy opportunities that students have had in their home countries in their first languages, because this knowledge informs instruction and instructional planning. So as part of this part of Module 6, participants will have opportunities to reflect on their current practice and identify concrete steps they can take to ensure MTSS is meeting the needs of their students. The second big part of Pathway 6.2 is about incorporating CLRP into academic interventions. It's really about looking at the instruction that's happening in each tier. In the previous module, Module 5, Academics, participants have had opportunities to learn extensively about the features of effective academic instruction. Now, the practices explored in Module 5 are also necessary for culturally and linguistically diverse students, but additional considerations are needed. In a culturally and linguistically responsive MTSS, instruction is informed by teachers' knowledge of students' cultural and linguistic assets. Educators ensure that students' cultures and lived experiences are represented in the curriculum, and they articulate high expectations of all students. For students learning in their first language, second language, or both, teachers implement practices and interventions with demonstrated effectiveness for English learners and dual language learners. Route 6.3.3 through 6.3.5 focus specifically on considerations for reading, writing, and math instruction for culturally and linguistically diverse students. So what types of learning opportunities will participants have in Pathway 6.2? Participants will have a chance to see models in action. We'll share instructional routines that you can implement in your classroom. For example, you'll receive guidance on instructional routines for teaching new vocabulary and language concepts. In addition to modeling, implementation examples, and guided practice, in this pathway, we'll share several tools we hope you can add to your teacher toolkit. One example of what you'll receive guidance on is using sentence stems and discussion stems to promote academic language development. Educators want to provide and display sentence stems and explicitly teach students how to use them in their speaking and their writing. These scaffolds support high-quality classroom discourse and promote active engagement in classroom interactions, specifically for English learners. We'll also share various instructional tools and cognitive organizers that help ensure that students are receiving equitable opportunities to use and practice the languages they're learning. It's important that English learners not only develop receptive skills, but also expressive skills and feel empowered to participate in classroom interaction. Here are a few other examples of tools and resources we'll share as part of 6.2. One tool you may find really helpful is the Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Response to Intervention Fidelity Rubric. It provides a framework for evaluating the extent to which critical components of RTI are in place, specifically those considerations for English learners. This rubric was adapted from a tool developed by the Center on Response to Intervention to ensure that the unique needs of culturally and linguistically diverse students are met within MTSS. Other tools that you'll find shared throughout this pathway are a parent read aloud routine that supports home and school connections and developing early literacy, and a guidebook for implementing data meetings for English learners. So finally, in pathway 6.3, educators and participants will have the opportunity to examine the characteristics of behavior intervention, incorporating culturally and linguistically responsive practices. Participants will also explore implicit bias and how this affects the way we see behavior problems in our schools. Educators will have the opportunity to learn various ways to integrate CLRP in behavior interventions and assessments. According to the Kirwan Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio State University, implicit biases are the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our actions, understanding of events, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Activated involuntarily, without awareness or intentional control, they may advantage some people while disadvantaging others. So throughout this module, educators will engage in activities and learning applications that will allow them to reflect on their own biases and how they may affect the way they see behaviors in their school and classrooms. So this concludes the big 3 ideas of Module 6. I'll turn it back over to Michelle so she can conclude the webinar.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you for sharing your expertise. I told you guys were really going to like all of this information they had to share. So thank you for joining us today on today's webinar. Be sure to join us next week, and we will showcase the next module, decision making. Thank you, and have a wonderful week.